So I'd like to welcome you to our Zoom session with artists featured in the current exhibition, Practice in Gestures. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land we are on is the ancestral territory of the Hunkaminam speaking peoples. This is the language spoken by Musqueam and many nations in the Fraser River Delta. On behalf of the Musqueam people, we welcome you to the ancestral territory of the Hunkaminam speaking peoples. We are grateful for the opportunity to create, live, and work on this land. Practice in Gestures draws together works by 6 artists living and working in BC: Farheen HaQ, Deborah Koenker, Bev Koski, Mitra Mahmoudi, Bettina Matzkuhn, and Barbara Ziegler. The exhibition includes textile works, beading, embroidery, video, ceramic, and mixed media. When I first began organizing the exhibition, my starting point was Deborah Koenker's work, Hanging by a Thread, Anonymous Revision. This body of work began as a single embroidered work, begun in 2002, that Deborah had donated to the gallery for a fundraiser that we were having. Over the years, it has enlarged to 132 works. It was Deborah's ongoing commitment to a body of work over a really long period of time, the nature of the work, how it was made, issues that the work addressed that were still relevant after 19 years that I kept going back to. In considering the 6 artists' works to include in the exhibition, I was looking at not only what kind of knowledge the objects have, but what kinds of knowledge are needed at this moment. The artists confront colonial and patriarchal histories, as well as critical environmental challenges. The last 20 months have been extraordinary in what can be described as a collision of crises. The pandemic has heightened awareness of already existing challenges and problems in our world, while it presented many new ones. Unless you are an essential worker, many of us withdrew into our homes. All the works in the exhibition share a vocabulary of simple gestures rooted in domestic familiarity. Common to all the works is the potential of small and intimate gestures to expand from personally meaningful to globally relevant. Deborah Koenker and Bettina Matzkuhn employ thread and needle in their intricately embroidered works that speak to gender inequality and issues of immigration and environmental degradation, respectively. Bev Koski employs beading to create her powerful works that address Indigenous identity and colonial stereotyping. Rituals and acts of washing are explicit in the video and installation works of Barbara Ziegler and implicit in Mitra Mahmoudi's vessels. Ziegler has been washing out the eggshells of eggs her family has consumed for over 33 years, calling attention to the creation of rituals and the intersections of humans and the environment. Mahmoudi's installation warns of displays of ostentation, favoring acts of kindness and compassion. Gestures of care are embedded in the video work of Farheen HaQ, who examines sweet childhood memories in the context of colonial histories, as well as the care found in domestic chores. For the conversation today, we will be focusing on 3 artists and their work: Farheen HaQ, Deborah Koenker, and Bettina Matzkuhn, who are joining us today. If you wish to know more about the artists, A Practice in Gestures, you can visit the gallery's website for a short virtual tour through the exhibition. I'm very interested in how artists practice in addition to what and how they produce. How does a practice change over time? Not only how it responds to the histories mentioned, but also to personal circumstances. How do artists maintain an art practice, caring for children and family? Speaking to the works directly throughout the history of art, decoration, and domestic handicrafts, as well as issues relating to women's work, have been devalued because of their association with the domestic and the feminine. So I'm really pleased to introduce the 3 artists here. I'm going to introduce Farheen HaQ first. Farheen. Farheen HaQ's multidisciplinary practice employs video, installation, and performance. As a South Asian Muslim Canadian artist living in Victoria, BC, her current work focuses on understanding her family history on Canadian territories, caregiving, and the body as a continuum of culture and time. She has exhibited her work in galleries and festivals throughout Canada and internationally. Farheen received a bachelor's degree in international development from the University of Toronto, a B.Ed degree from the University of Ottawa, and an MFA in visual arts from York University. In 2014, she was nominated for the Canadian Sylvie Art Award. I'm happy to introduce, secondly, Deborah Koenker.
Hi.
Deborah Koenker is a Vancouver-based interdisciplinary artist. Her practice explores narratives, borders, and transformative justice. Professor Emeritus Emily Carr, University of Art and Design. She was instrumental in establishing Malaspina Printmakers Workshop in Vancouver. She served as their inaugural director. Active in curatorial projects, writing panels, lectures, and artist residency programs internationally. Deborah was selected for an invitational residency on equal justice at the Santa Fe Art Institute, New Mexico, and the Canadian Council International Paris Studio. Her work, exhibited in Canada, the US, Mexico, and Spain, is represented in more than 30 public collections in Canada and the United States. And I'm really pleased to introduce the third artist who's with us today is Bettina Matzkuhn. Bettina works primarily in hand embroidery, valuing its versatility as a visual language. Her narratives predominantly focus on ecology, weather, and geography. Bettina holds a BFA and an MA from Simon Fraser University and is the recipient of Canada Council and British Columbia Arts Council grants. She has exhibited in solo and group exhibitions across Canada, as well as Korea and the United States. Her work is found in national public collections such as the Surrey Art Gallery, Cambridge Art Galleries, and the Weldon Map Library at Western University. And she lives and works in Vancouver, British Columbia. So what we're going to be looking at is a short video with Farheen HaQ. In this video, Drinking from My Mother's Saucer, Farheen endeavors to reconcile childhood memories of her mother serving chai in a saucer with a gift of a bone china teacup from her partner's British grandfather. In this compact and arresting video, HaQ investigates the colonial practice of using buffalo bones in the production of bone china and the devastating consequences to Indigenous peoples. She considers her own complicity in Canada's colonization and that of her own colonized ancestors. Deborah Koenker's work in this installation, Hanging by a Thread, Anonymous Revision. Deborah Koenker considers the status of women's work and the historical practice of excluding women from art studios and exhibitions. The small embroidered works reference needlepoint samplers, and they are based on photocopied details of 16th and 17th century old master landscapes, drawings and engravings by male artists. As most women did not have access to education and training, stitch samplers were a means to learn the alphabet, read and write, and to enhance their homes. Over the 19-year period of working on this series, Koenker used waiting time to stitch the works, medical appointments, children's lessons, work meetings. For her, waiting time became studio time, fitting creative work into the small spaces of housework, childcare, and other responsibilities. In a subversive gesture, Deborah inserts a number of embroidered works based on her own drawings among the masters, raising questions of artistic value and the lack of historical opportunities for women. In Bettina's installation of handmade life jackets, SOS, Bettina highlights the vulnerability of refugees and migrants, a daughter of refugees who immigrated to Canada in the early 50s. Bettina inherited her parents' appreciation for the natural world. SOS is comprised of 7 life jackets. Their interior linings are elaborately embroidered with landscapes that represent peace, shelter, work, water, freedom, and beauty. They're displayed upright, and they function as immigrant proxies huddled together. The life jacket is an iconic symbol of migration in the 21st century, underlying the despair of people fleeing. Highlighting the refugee crisis caused by the effects of global warming, Matzkuhn suggests that nature too requires rescuing. And so I would like to start a discussion in looking at the practice of Farheen, Deborah, and Bettina. And so I'll start with you, Farheen, if that's okay. I'd like to start with how you have navigated your practice through the years.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak, and just seeing those images. I'm just so moved by your works, Bettina and Deborah, and just the vision, Nan, of bringing these works together. It's very inspiring for me to be showing alongside everybody with the care and tenderness and the attention. So the question you're asking, Nan, and just hello, I haven't done too many of these webinars, but thank you to everyone who's listening and out there. It's really nice to see some folks saying hello in the chat. And I'm here on Lekwungen territory today, where I've been living for 23 years with my family. I have 2 kids and a partner. And how have I navigated my practice throughout the years? The first word that comes to mind is, it's always a challenge, particularly when I think about being an artist and raising a family. So I have 2 children, 12 and 14. And, the other day we were chatting and Deborah was saying, her kids are in their 30s and it's still like, you're never done. And even though my kids are teenagers, the kind of commitment and energy shifts. But coming back to the studio practice, I was thinking about, being a mother, raising a family, and being committed to my art practice. And my practice wouldn't exist if it weren't for my family. So, there's this kind of push-pull, or the struggle is to find those spaces and the time to make the work. But the work for me comes from my family and from my experience of motherhood. So specifically the works that you saw in the slideshow today, Fold, which is that dresser with the chair, and there's a monitor playing on top. That work, that's like a performance for the camera that I did, where I'm simply gathering up linens in my arm, came from that the experience I had of kind of being in that transition place of being done with early childhood. I made those works when my kids were about 7, 9. And I was grieving not having little babies anymore, which, I remember how many times had I talked to people saying, I just can't wait till they're older. And then when they're both in school, and then I'll get like 5 hours in the studio, and I couldn't wait for that. And then when that came and I was starting to create this body of work, I had all this quiet time during the days, although there's also, always dentist appointments and things before and after school. But the grief that came up for me around the kinds of ways that my body doesn't hold my children anymore. So that piece fold where I'm just bringing in these linens and, kind of speaking also to like laundry. But in the end, I'm just kind of like swaddling these linens and cradling them in my arms and remembering something that I used to do every day that I no longer do anymore and that I will not do with my children ever in the same way. And I was really touched by this like surprising grief. And that's an example of how do I now, like that for me shows that, my work, that work came out of direct family experience. And pretty much all my work, like recent work in the last kind of probably 5 to 10 years is about my relationship with my family or place and how. So there was no work without them. And it's also hard because family life, as many of us know, and whether you have children or not, just being committed to our relationships and serving and caring for others requires time and care, and the other piece as well that was in the slideshow, drinking from my mother's saucer, that is a work that emerged, kind of illustrates how, politics and everything kind of in the world manifests in our private home space as well. And so I invited a curator. That video emerged when I was invited to create a piece for France Trepanier, who was curating a show here in Victoria called Offerings. And so I invited her over for tea, and I thought I'll make her chai because I make chai a lot. And I thought that will be nice to sit at my kitchen table and offer this up and as a way to get to know her. And then I knew I wanted to make something. I'd been wrestling with ideas of my mixed race family, my children being half of European ancestry and half of South Asian ancestry, and just also kind of asking all these questions around what it means to be here, what my experience as a settler is, but also my own kind of colonized history. And, all of that takes place when I invite France to sit down at my kitchen table, and I make chai for her and pour it into these fancy teacups that we inherited from my partner's grandfather. And they're bone china. And I kind of had a sense, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure, like I knew that bone china, there was something to do with bones. And then France, tells me that afternoon as we're sitting having tea, she's like, well, what happened? And we started doing research, and she calls up these images on the internet that, bone china was made with the bones of buffaloes, and the buffalo from the prairies, and sent over to England, and by the truckload, like there's images of like these giant stacks and stacks of bones and skulls, and then made their way across the prairies to Montreal and then over the Atlantic. And because the tax on porcelain from China was too high, so England started making its own china. And so, and of course that has an impact on the prairie peoples, and all of that is manifest as, in 2021, as I sit there, or this was a few years ago, but, when I drink tea, all those considerations intersect right in my kitchen table. So, and that kind of comes from these questions of, how do my children belong? How do they kind of hold both of these identities of colonizer, colonized? How do I hold those? So it's an exciting and rich place navigating making work in these over the years. And I know I've answered it specifically with like in relationship to family, Nan, but that's what's coming to mind right now. And I want to be mindful of giving Deborah and Bettina chances to speak. So I'll pause there.
That's great. Thanks, Farheen. Mm-hmm. And Deborah, we've had lots of conversations about how, artists, particularly women artists, navigate with family responsibilities. And I'd like, you to share that with the people who are here
Well,
today.
first of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to say hello to everybody that I can't see, but some of you, I know you're out there, and to my sister in Guadalajara, Teresa, especially. So what came to mind in talking about family and life in general, I suppose, and maintaining an art practice is the question of balance. And I think that's one of the hardest things to maintain. It's like skateboarding, which I don't do, or the balance ball that you have at the physiotherapist. You're never always in balance. And for me, teaching and family were both took priority, and making art is something I feel I must do. It's what I'm made to do, for better or for worse. So the question becomes, how do you continue doing that and maintain any kind of balance? And so, as you can see with the work that's shown at Richmond right now, one of my strategies was to have portable, small work that I didn't have to think about too much. I had to think about it in terms of beginning it and what my intention was and how I was going to proceed. But as soon as I had a few embroideries ready to stitch, that was it. I could listen at meetings, I could pay attention to everything around me, and it was just more kind of automatic. It didn't require that extra level of attention, that thinking. My thinking was somewhere else, is what I'm trying to say, and my making and my doing was semi-automatic. My other strategy has been to tackle larger installation works and to do them slowly. And so, as I mentioned the other day when we were talking, I kind of see myself as a guerrilla artist. So, you strike while you can, and then you retreat into the jungle, sort of like that. So I have done large installations dealing with Mexican farm workers, seasonal workers in Canada. And that took me 3 years. Whereas I think if I hadn't been teaching, maybe if I didn't have family, maybe all the maybes, it would have maybe been shorter. But that was another strategy. So to take the time that's given and to use it well. And in terms, it isn't just my children now at the age that I am, it's also my parents. So, it has been primarily children, but now it is children and parents. So that's challenging, but it's really part of life. And I think, what was the other thing I wanted to say? Having a supportive partner is really helpful. So my partner, Roberto, is very supportive of what I do and always has been, and that makes it easier. And my kids, I will often ask them, or I used to when I could grab their attention better than I can now. They're off with their own lives. But they had good opinions. I'd often turn to them and say, well, what do you think about this? Or which is better? Or, and they have good eyes and good sense. So they would also contribute. And I think to a certain extent also, the social impact of the work that I do, or what I hope will be the social impact, is also important to me in creating a world for everybody to live in, which is going to be better, more fair. So that's about what I have to say right now.
Thanks, Deborah. And Bettina, we had you joined us for a conversation the other day, and one of the things you did mention is that when you were raising a family, nobody really talked about it. And I just would like to know how you yourself navigated as well.
Yeah, I'd also like to say I'm so thrilled to be in this show because it's just such a beautiful collection of work. Really happy to be included. I did things backwards in my life. I had babies when I was quite young, and then I went to university when I was 40. So I was always the geezer in the classroom, and but it was the right time. I knew I didn't have time to dither around, and I worked really hard, and I really, really enjoyed it. When I went back to school, my kids were 9 and 13, and I said, "You have to help me. I can't hold down a job and go to school and do everything." So they're actually quite capable people, and they pitched in with chores, and now they're pretty good cooks, and we kind of looked after each other during that time. I've heard a talk recently by the embroidery artist Case Zavaglia in the States, and she said, "Children inform your practice; they don't detract from it," and that struck me as true. I've always worked with textiles and embroidery and drawing, and I'm grateful that I don't work in a toxic medium because, for someone who's a printmaker, sculptor, has to work with certain materials, they can't do it with kids underfoot. But I always had a corner or a room. Now I have a studio, and I never stopped working. So even when the kids were very small, they knew that was mom's pile of stuff and you didn't fool with it. I did have other things that they were happy and welcome to unpack and fool around with, but my work, they just knew that was my thing. Like Deborah, I worked in stolen moments. I always had a Ziploc bag, in basketball practice or band rehearsals, and on my lunch hour at my day job. So I still try and do that. I still try and keep a small project that's portable. When the kids were really small, I loved being with them, and we always made stuff together and did things, but I did hanker for uninterrupted time. And one of my neighbors and I worked out this thing where we swapped kids once a week in the morning, and that worked out really well. And when there's elections, I'm always looking for the person who's going to come up with daycare, because I just think for any woman who's trying to work, get educated, do anything, she needs help in that way. And at the time I couldn't afford daycare, but this worked out really well. We had a good morning each week. And I only ever worked part-time at my day job because I knew if I worked full-time, I would be unbearable, that I needed some time to work on things. And while I was going to school, I didn't get a lot of my own projects done, but then school was the project at the time. So I think that's all.
Thanks, Bettina. I just want to say to the people who are watching us, if you have any questions, if you can type those into chat. Don't be shy, and please don't wait till the end. So, we were talking about earlier times as well, and now we look at maybe 10, 20 years down the line, how that, maybe your practice has kind of either evolved, or if you see that some of your challenges, are they different? There has been some mention that no, in some ways they're not, because even when your children are adults, you're still involved and worried about them. But in terms of, how has that changed your practice? If now maybe you have more time. I know at one point, Deborah in a conversation said she goes back to earlier themes that maybe she didn't have time to explore as deeply. And now, and I find with artists that things that were of interest to you maybe 10 or 20 years ago kind of still are those things that kind of keep reoccurring. But now maybe with some experience, life experience, having raised children and everything, how that has changed. And if you find yourself going back to some of those earlier themes. So I'm going to ask Deborah, since I already pinned you down on this, if you could speak to that a little bit, because I thought it was an important point to make.
Well, I do, in looking back, see the seeds of my practice now in my early work. So, for instance, a collaboration I did with my husband, Roberto Pacheco, the Cherry Tree Project, that was pre-kids. It's bridging boundaries in our backyard between several houses, creating a bridge, working with walls. I mean, I see that now in my practice, but it's shifted, it's evolved and changed. So it's interesting, the longer one practices, to go back and look at, oh, I was doing that before, just in a very different format. I think another thing that does influence one's practice is financing, money. I was able sometimes to do large projects like that bridge piece because I had Canada Council funding. When you don't have funding, how do you keep working? And I think you use what you have. And that's been something that's, that bridge piece got recycled into 2 more installations as I took apart the lumber and reused things. So that has been of interest to me now in my practice, reusing and saving things. I saved a lot of things, as you can probably see behind me. So using what you have, and it's been important to me not anymore. Well, physically, I cannot do what I used to do. I don't have the physical strength. So, I'm working in photography, drawing, textile, but useful residue is something I think about a lot with my work. And so a kind of basic example would be, say you had the opportunity to exhibit in a country like Cuba, where they are in need of many things. They don't have many things. So what if I were to take things to make my installation there that I could then distribute afterwards, not ship home, not store, give away? So that's something that has developed in my practice, as well as I mentioned just now, the physical limitations. So working smaller, working in a more immediate way. Those would be the biggest changes, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Deborah. And Farheen, you're kind of mid-career, or what we would call a mid-career artist. So in terms of how you've practiced, your children are older now, but has your practice changed, or what things have maybe influenced it?
I'm loving the chat, and I'm also so appreciating. I'm really appreciating the intergenerationality of this show, and every time I've chatted with and had the opportunity to listen to Deborah and Bettina. And I think the thing that's coming up for me, I too love the stolen moments and the guerrilla work, and just this idea of useful residue. These are all really brilliant ways to name these strategies or these ways of working. I think the thing that's changed for me, Nan, over the 20 plus years that I've been working, is actually how I think about what I'm doing. I realize, I think what I when I was thinking about how I navigated kids and work, and kind of saying the work is because the kids, one of the things that I find myself saying a lot to other artist friends or just friends when I'm finding myself in this struggle of trying to kind of find those stolen moments or try to make the work, is, in fact, I'm always working. And to not get stuck in that kind of that binary of, when I'm being an artist is when I'm in the studio and making work, although that's legitimate. At some point we give shape and form to things, but that I'm actually, my work, what I'm interested in is my life. So my dream time is when I'm making dinner. That's my research, is actually when I'm sitting and I'm actually paying attention to how we're sitting, what's happening with the cut. Like, so this attentiveness. And I'm an insight meditation practitioner, and I also teach a little bit. My meditation and my kind of spiritual practice is very much intersected with how I work. And really what I'm doing is I'm realizing I don't actually need to like get away, although there's from the family. How I've come to understand my work and what I do is I'm actually often magnifying what's already happening and being attentive to certain gestures or intersections or kind of insights that I'm having as I'm paying attention to certain dynamics, like whether it's the cup of tea or whether it's, oh, when I'm folding laundry, there's something that's coming up for me. And so there is this kind of quality of paying attention while I'm in the in the jungle, as you're kind of saying, Deborah, and then finding that that space, coming to the studio or setting up in the living room or the garage or wherever. I really kind of make space. I do have this as a studio space, but often I'm filming upstairs in my living room or setting up a shoot in the garage. Like, it's all happening in the home space. But what's shifted is that I'm coming more to terms with integrating how I think about it, because a big part of, I think, my struggle in the past has been predicated on this idea that I need to escape, get away, that like be separate to make the work. And I still struggle saying this. Like, I definitely don't need to be like, those modernist painters, 8 hours. Like, I think of Pollock, and somebody bringing you your dinner and making your work, because this is the real stuff. You've got your Ziploc bag, you're waiting outside Taekwondo, and you're doing stuff. But there's, I think for me, the challenge is how can I be in the thick of my life? And because this is what I'm interested in making, how do I bring that quality of attention and presence to my work? And then like, for me, 2/3 of my work is like just being attentive to my life. And then the last third is like, making an installation or the video. Yeah. And I really appreciate what you said, Deborah, about time. I too have just given myself a lot of more permission. I take 2 to 3 years to make works. Sometimes there's smaller things that come sooner, but otherwise I think about a project for a good couple years and then it manifests.
If I could just make a quick comment about paying attention. I heard a Robert Irwin lecture years ago in LA, and he talked about making art as giving people the opportunity to pay attention. So I think that's a really good point. You're paying attention, but when they see what you're doing, they're also having that opportunity to pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Bettina, so again, 10, 20 years later after you've been working, how your practice maybe has changed. Time has been mentioned by Farheen and Deborah. Just some of the insight that you can bring to practicing for a longer period of time, and how it might have changed from the beginning when your children were younger, when your life was different.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is uninterrupted time. And it's not that I regret having kids and family and looking after my parents who have passed away. I am so thrilled to go to my studio, and I pack my thermos and my lunch, just like my dad used to, and I go down there and play. And I'm just so grateful for that time to tinker with things and to move from one thing to another and to experiment. And I also appreciate having time to write proposals and grant applications, because that takes a lot of focus, and I'm a slow thinker, so I can't just write something up and send it off. I have to let it fester for a while. I think when I was younger, I did some animated films for the National Film Board using textiles, and one of them was about sailing across the Salish Sea and just being a kid on a boat with my parents. And in a way, the theme of loving the landscape, of being part of the landscape and being out in it is, I think that still is part of what I do. It's important to me. Other challenges, like space is a huge challenge because my studio is fairly small. I can't store work there. So my second bedroom in my little apartment is full of crates. And the other facet of money, it was always tight, especially when I became a single parent. And I had the day job. I worked as a sessional at Emily Carr. I taught workshops. I had foreign students living with us. So just anything to keep us afloat. And they were all wonderful experiences. But I'm again really grateful now that I have a small income, but I know that, the groceries are covered. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of come to realize that my work has two streams. One that's experimental work that's close to my heart, the life jackets, the backpacks, things that I dream up and I think, oh, I'm going to try and make this, and they don't always work. And then I also make things that somebody might conceivably buy to put over their fireplace because I need to pay my studio overhead. And I love making those too because they're sort of an opportunity to try different materials or to try to get the effect of something or to just celebrate a place that I'm trying to depict. And aging is now, a consideration. So I'm just like, since I've retired, I'm like a marble out of a slingshot. I'm just like, let me at it, and I'll just work for as long as I can.
Yeah. Thanks, Bettina. Your parents really gave you a gift with their love of the landscape.
Yeah, I think of them all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really evident. We do have some people who have asking some questions. And I'm also watching the time, and I know we got a bit of a late start, so we will go over a little bit. I mean, if you have to leave, we certainly understand. So there is a question, and I'm not quite sure if I understand it. Do you have a work that you feel was one of your best? Oh, I see, that didn't catch on with the public. If so, why do you think it didn't? If there is something that maybe briefly you can, because there are a few more questions and I'd like to get to those too. So Farheen, I can see you nodding, so I'm going to jump to you if that's okay.
Okay, sure. Yeah, well, I immediately thought of a work that I created that was a little controversial, so it didn't catch on with everyone, and it just speaks to the complicated, just diversity of perspectives. So this was a very early, actually it was my very first very first video that I did. It was a loop. It was a single take. It's from 2001, so 20 years ago. It's called Uncovering, and it's basically like a bust shot of me, and I take an extended piece of fabric and I bring it up over my head, and then I begin to wrap it around, and I put it on like a hijab, and it's in slow motion and it's one take. I put it on, and at the end I unwind it and I take it off, and then it goes back to the beginning, and I'm bare, like kind of up to here, like bare shoulders, just face. This was like my first work. A lot of my early work is looking at exploring my identity as a Muslim woman. And that work showed at the Blackwood Gallery in Mississauga at U of T campus. And the Muslim Students Association, a few people were really offended by the work, which, you know, I'm not surprised. Even within my family, there's been folks in my family that have issue with the work. You know, putting the hijab on is a very personal, highly kind of intimate act. And here I am putting it on and taking it off and putting it on and taking it off. It kind of just loops. And yeah, so they were great because they had a few complaints about it. What I didn't realize is it was shown in a very public place. It wasn't just in the gallery, as you know, people go into the space and know they're going to be seeing art. It was like out in their student kind of space on a big monitor. And it was a great experience in that their segment of the population really didn't appreciate the work and felt like it was crossing a boundary. And the gallery, I was already back here in Victoria, and the gallery said, let's have a discussion, and can we fly you out, and can we have like a forum on this? And I was like, absolutely. And so I think it was such a good example of sitting down and having conversation, and that a piece of art was able to elicit kind of a deeper conversation about the work. And it was great. It was awesome. It was probably one of the few times where I've had like half the audience were hijabis, which is so great, because I think this is the problem. A lot of gallery spaces, unless you're, you know, the white cube, it kind of brings in certain kind of audiences. And so showing this work in a really public space and folks knowing where I was coming from, and we were just, you know, listening to each other. I think it was a really rich discussion. I don't need to get into explaining the work or anything, but ultimately, a good experience. But yeah, you know, and not everyone always appreciates or supports works, and that is completely valid.
Thank you.
Oh.
Bettina or Deborah, do you have maybe something, a short anecdote that you'd like to add? Or no? Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, all right, that's great. Thank you. So there's a lot of comments, and I'm just going to, not so many questions, but just people are really appreciating the stories. They're appreciating just your honest take on it, and just they've picked up on various things that all of you have said. And I would just like to kind of, before I say a few, relieving remarks, do any of you have anything that you thought, oh, I wish I had said that. I meant to say that.
Probably later.
Probably later, yeah, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thinking of it later.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to, I see this comment, how did you come to recognize and embrace yourself as artists?
Yeah. Yep.
I know excellent artists who have worked for years and do not get exhibitions, and they still are artists, they're still practicing, and they know that they're artists.
Mm-hmm.
And for myself, I knew I wanted to be an artist when I was a very young kid. I grew up in rural Indiana in a small town. I didn't really know what was out there. I remember hearing about Paris and street artists, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to go to Paris and be a street artist. I had no idea what that meant, but I just think that, Joseph Beuys said everybody's an artist. Well, I think you just follow what you need to do. Mm-hmm. You follow it, and everything that you make is not necessarily good. And that's referring to the previous question or question about something that you thought was good that other people didn't respond well to. Mm-hmm. I have put out work like my grad show for my master's. The first work I did sprouted all the rest of the work in the show. And that first work I struggled and struggled with, and it was still in the show and it wasn't very good. So, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly is all there. Just, you do have to believe in yourself, recognize and embrace yourself as an artist. I think that's the key. Whether you show or don't show, I have a pile of work that's never been seen. And I'm sure, you know, most artists that I know also have that, but it doesn't stop them from making and being artists. So it's not always external validation, but it's helpful. That is helpful for sure.
Yes. And if you're not getting that kind of validation, if you're not getting shows, I mean, you know, we know a lot of artists who don't get a lot of shows, and yet they persist, and they persist in living a creative life, because it's, you know, so worth it.
Well, and it's so needed. It's so needed by the world, and not to sound
yeah, I know,
full of myself as an artist. That's not my intention, but yeah, I mean, we do present in our work things for people to consider, to stop, look, and listen, to pay attention, to feel, and that's great. That's the best.
I just I'm so grateful to you three, and to the other artists too in the show. I love the work that you do. I think, you know, I love the fact that it is personal, it is intimate, and yet it just speaks to really what is happening in the world. And I just think that the work is intelligent, and yet, you know, people can access it. I mean, I think people can see it and respond to it, and somehow bring it into their own lives. And I also want to thank you for your frankness, your honesty in discussing some of this, because I think in many ways, a lot of times we don't speak about women artists, some of their struggles, being mothers, being parents, all of those kinds of issues, and just kind of being honest about it. And yet here you are, you're out there, you're making, you're showing. Your work is really good. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Nan.
Yeah.
And just thank you all for being artists, everybody that's here and everybody that's out there that we don't see, because I love seeing it. It means a lot in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And Kathy, I want to thank Kathy Tykolis, who has been managing us and also, you know, setting it up and everything. And then I got a little text from her, and her chat froze. So I think we can say goodbye. And I think Kathy will be taking care of things to take it down. Again, thank you for everybody who's joined us, and for all your comments and everything. It's really great. And please, if you haven't seen the show, come out and see it. It's great. And if you cannot make it out, take the virtual tour. Oh, here's a note from Kathy. I'm just, yep, she's going to log off. So here we go. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Stay well.